Good morning. I'm Harley Schlanger from the LaRouche Organization with your daily video update for August 16th, 2022. As we're moving into the middle of August, I want to remind people why it is that wars and other catastrophes often take place during the month of August. This is a time when people's heads are filled with fantasy, going to the beach, going to the mountains, cookouts, escape from reality. And it's at these moments that crises escalate, that deliberation does not take place, and that accidents can happen with fatal consequences. Now, if you look at the world today, we're in the midst of a confluence of crises, any number of which can trigger much more serious confrontation, civil unrest, and chaos. Let's just begin with the situation in Ukraine, where the dictator, the so-called heroic Democrat, President Zelensky, has now moved to fire more officials of the security forces of Ukraine in the SBU. He fired his old friend and business partner, let's see, where's his name here? Ivan Bakanov. He fired him in the middle of July, and then yesterday fired 3 more leaders of the SBU, accusing them of treason. Now, this, of course, is occurring at a moment where the war is going badly for Ukraine, where Ukraine has suffered the consequences of a public relations fiasco by putting out a target list of 70 plus individuals, including many of the individuals associated with the Schiller Institute, which they had to remove from their website. But what we're seeing is the instability is having a profound effect on the government of Ukraine. Now, why is it then that NATO and the West is continuing to push Ukraine to escalate the war, offering to pour in more weapons and more money? Let's look for a moment at the economic situation inside Ukraine. According to the rating agencies Standard & Poor's and Fitch, Ukraine is now technically in default. They're restructuring $20 billion in debt. This is called distressed debt. The reason it's distressed is they don't have the money to pay it, and they're not going to be able to pay it. And so the reclassification is taking place, which S&P described as tantamount to default. Now, they have a budget deficit of $50 billion out of a GDP of $150 billion. That's completely unsustainable, especially during a war. They need at least $5 billion a month from the West, plus for the next 3 months, an additional $4 billion per month. So they need $9 billion a month merely to cover the outstanding payments that are required. The Ukrainian finance minister said that they expect $3 billion from the U.S. in August, another $1.5 billion in September, toward a total pledge of $7.5 billion, on top of which they expect $2.3 billion from U.S. Agency for International Development. Now, here we have an absolute insanity, pouring weapons into a situation which is deteriorating every day and requires the United States to fund the functions of government, including to fund the function of targeting the free speech of people who oppose this war. So this is where you see the effect of a policy that's gone wrong. In fact, if you look at it, what I covered yesterday, it was a year ago that the U.S. left Afghanistan in disgrace, and yet we immediately went into a new war, and we're threatening to escalate against China in Taiwan, as another congressional delegation of 5 members showed up in Taiwan, and the Chinese increased their military exercises in response. This is what I mean about the guns of August. Who's paying attention? Biden's on vacation. What's Kamala Harris doing? What's the U.S. military doing other than wringing their hands in despair as they're seeing the gap growing between the military capabilities of Russia and China and the United States? Now, at the same time, the U.S. is escalating the economic warfare towards China, moving toward a possible decoupling of the U.S. economy with China, which at this point would be a complete disaster. What was just passed through the Congress is what's being called chip warfare. That is the decoupling of the semiconductor supply chain. This is occurring at a moment where you have inflation, where you have deficits, where you have overall chaos inside the United States economically. Now, it's not just the US. In Britain, the economy continues to contract. In Germany, we're facing a winter with shortages of electricity, heating oil, an inability to sustain the industrial capability of Germany, as has been announced by leaders of major German industries. And then you can add to that in contrast, the Russian economy continues to move ahead. It was announced yesterday that European Union exports to Russia rose for the second consecutive month, up 18% in June, in spite of the sanctions. And discussions are continuing between Russia and India for expansion of trade, and the involvement of Russia and China in Africa continues to grow. So you see this contrast, and then what's the U.S. response? A chip war against China, attacks on India to put pressure on them to break with Russia, and this is continuing. Now, the same thing was attempted when Blinken went to Africa recently and ran into a stone wall of resistance from the South African foreign minister, who said that she would not allow the United States and Blinken to bully South Africa into breaking with Russia. She said South Africa is a sovereign nation and will not submit to bullying. We also see the same kind of statement coming from former Pakistani Prime Minister Imran Khan, who pointed to the Indian relationship with Russia as an example for Pakistan instead of submitting to blackmail threats from the United States. Now, going back to Ukraine and the war danger, there is an ongoing discussion process underway between Ukrainian military officials and parliamentarians with British Defense Minister Ben Wallace about escalating the pressure on Russia in Crimea, including the possibility of blowing up the bridge over the Kerch Straits. This would be a provocation, especially if British weapons are used to do this. So we see the strategy of tension escalating worldwide with war, with economic crises. And we see in the United States the raid by the out-of-control Justice Department FBI apparatus against former President Trump. This is leading to an accelerating polarization of U.S. politics, inflaming passions when it's necessary that there be serious deliberation on how to address this confluence of crises bearing down on the U.S. like a tsunami. So in this moment, it's absolutely essential that people who have ideas, who have solutions, be brought forward into the situation. And most importantly, that includes the Schiller Institute and our long association with the ideas of Lyndon LaRouche, whose wife founded the Schiller Institute in 1984, and who continues to provide solutions to these crises. September 8th will mark the 100th anniversary of Lyndon LaRouche's birth, and we'll have celebrations for that, but more importantly, September 10th and 11th, a conference to take up the unique contributions of LaRouche on statecraft, on economic policy, on science policy, and on culture, which have to be seen as a unity. LaRouche's strength was that he did not look in Aristotelian categories and try and draw dots between or lines between dots. Instead, he looked at the universe as an evolving system in which man's creative capability played an increasing role in shaping the future. Now, we have this opportunity in front of us with the advances in science, the potential to harness nuclear fusion power, the exploration of space, the ability with optical biophysics to attack disease, with agricultural science to end hunger forever. Instead, we're trapped in this series of crises, which are completely controlled by a gang of criminal cartels who are asserting their power through the UK and US and NATO, using US military power as the threat to impose this so-called New World Order. That's why our conferences are so important. And I'd urge you to keep sharing our videos, going to our website, studying these ideas, and sign up for these conferences. Let's make September 10th and 11th a moment of solving these problems. And instead of waiting until September 10th and 11th, knowing that August is a month of crises, let's use the time between now and then to build a magnificent conference of deliberation to counter the insanity of the existing order, which is based on groupthink and enforced by social media and military power. So thanks for joining me. I'll see you again tomorrow.